It was the year 1492, though you wouldn't know it by looking around. The forests stretched out in every direction, thick with moss and mystery, and the rivers still hummed lullabies older than any flag. Somewhere in what is now the Bahamas, 3 ships bobbed nervously on the sea, like tourists who took the wrong turn, but decided to pretend they meant to get lost. You stand at the edge of a shoreline that knows how to keep secrets. Somewhere inland, a fire crackles in a Taino village, where sweet cassava bakes over stone. But from the surf, sails rise, battered, sun-bleached, and burdened with more ambition than supplies. Columbus has arrived, and the world will never be the same again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as we drift into tonight's tale, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Let's share this timeless journey together. Now, dim the lights, fluff your pillow, settle into your bed, adjust the brightness and volume of your device, ease your breath, and allow yourself to slip away into the tale of this country, America. Let's be clear, Columbus wasn't the first. Long before his boots touched Caribbean sand, Norse sagas whispered of a place called Vinland, where Leif Erikson supposedly stumbled into grapes and timber. There's even a theory, still debated naturally, that Chinese junks under Zheng He might have brushed the Pacific coast. Historians argue over all this, of course, because what would history be without a good bicker over maps? Still, by the early 1500s, Spain had decided this new world was more than a myth. Conquistadors arrived like salesmen with swords, peddling empires door to door. Florida saw Ponce de Leon traipsing through swamps in search of a youth potion. Honestly, someone should have told him about sunscreen instead. Meanwhile, the French sniffed around the northern woodlands, muttering something about beaver hats and divine destiny. And then there was Roanoke. Ah, Roanoke, the lost colony, the world's eeriest group exit. Established in 1585 off the coast of present-day North Carolina, it was meant to be England's big debut in the colonization theatre. But when supply ships finally returned years later, they found only silence and a tree with the word Croatone carved into it. Was it a message? A farewell? A secret recipe? No one knows. The place disappeared like the last cookie in a house of toddlers. In this dreamy stretch of time before America was even a flicker of an idea, the landscape was already thick with movement and meaning. Indigenous nations, from the Algonquin to the Haudenosaunee, lived, traded, feuded, and prayed here. Their villages were not just survival machines, they were cosmologies, rich in story and structure. Their maps weren't drawn with ink, but remembered in songs, star patterns, and riverside markings. You cross what will one day be Virginia, and the trees lean in like they're eavesdropping. Somewhere, a Powhatan elder shares a tale with his grandson about birds who borrow colours from the sky and how to follow deer tracks without scaring the forest. No textbooks, no PowerPoints, just memory, wind, and the crunch of footfall in leaves. By the early 1600s, Europe was watching these wild lands with growing appetite. England, feeling a little behind the curve and possibly jealous of Spain's shiny gold, rolled up its sleeves and prepared to try again. Jamestown was soon in the works, though no one had any idea just how messy that would get. But here, before the official story begins, the land still breathes without fences. The soil is untouched by ploughs, the sky unsliced by church steeples. The only documents are petroglyphs, the only clocks are shadows on stone. And so, you arrive at the brink of something colossal, not with a bang, but with a rustle in the reeds. You pause on a hilltop as distant drums echo from inland gatherings, and the sea pulls in another Spanish galleon, its hull creaking under imperial dreams. A storm is gathering, not the kind with lightning, but the kind made of ambition, trade goods, and poorly translated intentions. A fun detail: maps from this era often had dragons on them. Literal dragons. Just hanging out at the edges, doing dragon things. It was cartography with personality, because if you're going to make up places, you might as well add flair. Some believe those monsters were metaphors for the unknown, Others believed they were warnings, and a few just liked dragons. But soon, the mythical would give way to the mapped. The unknown would be charted, named, bought, and disputed. The colonies weren't here yet, but the stage was set. You could almost hear the musket balls rolling into place. Still, for one final moment, everything remains poised. The land is full of stories, but none have yet been stamped in European ink. The sky is wide, the rivers are unhurried, and the wind carries the last breath of an untouched world just before the curtain rises. It is May of 1607. The river moves slow and brown, dragging sticks and whispers in its current. You're standing beside the edge of the James River, watching a cluster of English settlers row toward a marshy peninsula. Their clothes are soaked, their tempers are soggy, and their plans, well, they're optimistic, if nothing else. Welcome to Jamestown, the first successful English colony in North America, though at this stage, successful is being generous. You see, the spot they chose is surrounded by brackish water, infested with mosquitoes, and, fun fact, lacks any clean source of drinking water. Brilliant choice, lads. As you follow them ashore, there's an odd mix of excitement and desperation in the air. They build a wooden fort, more out of fear than foresight. They're not alone, after all. The Powhatan Confederacy watches from the tree line, curious and cautious. The English call them savages, but these are people who've lived in balance with this land for centuries. They're not savages, they're experts, and they're keeping score. Inside the fort, things go from bad to worse. That first summer is blistering. The food is mostly biscuits and hope. By the winter of 1609, the so-called starving time descends. Some dig up corpses to eat, some boil their boots. It's not history's most flattering hour. But somewhere in the chaos, a wiry man named John Smith tries to hold things together. He's no saint, but he's resourceful. He tells big stories about saving the colony and being rescued by Pocahontas, the young daughter of Chief Powhatan. Historians still argue whether any of that actually happened. Smith's journal had more flair than fact-checking. Pocahontas, though, was real. Barely a teenager when she first interacted with the settlers, she walked a tightrope between two worlds. Later, she was taken captive, converted, and even paraded through English society like a political souvenir. But in this early moment, she's just a curious girl watching from behind a tree, wondering why these strangers keep building their homes in places that flood. A curious aside, tobacco, yes, the stuff that ends up in pipes and trade deals, becomes the colony's unlikely saviour. John Rolfe, another settler, figures out how to grow a milder strain that the English elite can't get enough of. Suddenly, the stinking crop becomes Virginia's gold. Fields spread like wildfire. The economy blooms, and so do the tensions with local tribes, whose lands are steadily swallowed. By 1619, the colony starts to take shape. A shipment arrives, this time not of nobles or carpenters, but women. About 90 of them. Wives for the settlers, the papers say. In exchange, tobacco. Romance, it seems, has an exchange rate. That same year, the first Africans are brought to Virginia. They come on a Portuguese slave ship seized by English privateers. The exact status of these people, enslaved or indentured, is still debated. But what's not debated is this. It marks the beginning of a long and painful legacy. Meanwhile, back in England, King James isn't thrilled with the chaos. In 1624, he revokes the Virginia Company's charter and makes it a royal colony. Because if you're going to mismanage an entire settlement, at least let the crown do it with style. You walk through Jamestown's market square, past a man bartering for nails and another complaining about spoiled beer. There's a strange charm here. Life is messy, but it's beginning to settle. Chickens dart between shacks. Children chase each other with sticks. Someone somewhere is trying to invent democracy, but keeps getting distracted by raccoons. The colony, though battered, is now more than a dream. It's a foothold, and like all footholds, it comes with blisters. One of the settlers, a carpenter named Edward, scribbles in his journal, We built our walls stout and our roofs uneven, and yet still it feels as though the wild watches us with raised brows. He's not wrong. The wild does watch, and it remembers. It is November of 1620. The wind howls across the Atlantic, flinging salt spray over the deck of a weather-worn ship called the Mayflower. You're standing beside passengers wrapped in wool and faith, faces pale from seasickness and hope. For over 2 months, they've bobbed along the ocean like a very determined cork, chasing the idea of freedom. Their intended destination? Virginia? Their actual landing? A frozen shore far to the north. Welcome to the beginning of Plymouth Colony, where even the GPS was off by a few hundred miles. You step ashore beside them. The ground is rocky, the trees lean in suspiciously, and snow crunches beneath your boots. The newcomers huddle together, staring at this unfamiliar land that promises no royal favour, no plantations, no gold, only the possibility of survival. But these aren't your usual adventurers. These are pilgrims, separatists, really. They fled England not for fortune, but for the right to worship their way without a bishop breathing down their necks. Their clothing is plain, but their convictions are anything but. Before even setting foot on land, they draw up an agreement, the Mayflower Compact. It's like the first group chat rules, setting the tone for self-governance. Short, pragmatic, and handwritten, probably by someone who hadn't slept in weeks. It's not quite a constitution, but it's a spark. Historians still debate how radical it really was, but for a group just off the boat, it's something. Winter hits hard. Half the settlers don't make it. The cold wraps around the colony like a bad debt. You pass by rows of makeshift shelters where the sick whisper prayers, and a woman uses the last of her flour to make a sad, pale biscuit that tastes like determination and regret. And yet, something strange happens. A man named Tisquantum, whom the English call Squanto, appears in the spring. He speaks English, fluently. That's a plot twist no one expected. Turns out he'd been taken to Europe years earlier and somehow made it back. He teaches the pilgrims how to plant corn, catch eels, and not starve. He's not doing this for fun. His own people, the Patuxet, were wiped out by disease. Still, his help is what gives the colony a fighting chance. Then there's the Wampanoag Sachem, Massasoit. He watches these settlers closely. They're weak, yes, but also useful. He forms an alliance with them, one that will hold, awkwardly, for a time. You sit in on the first Thanksgiving, which isn't exactly what the greeting cards promised. No cranberry sauce, no parade, just stewed pumpkin and a lot of side-eye. Further north, more ships arrive, and with them, more settlers. Not all are pilgrims. The Massachusetts Bay Colony springs up, bigger, stricter, and with grander plans. These Puritans don't just want religious freedom. They want a society built in the image of their beliefs. A city upon a hill, they say. Though ironically, they're not huge fans of dissent. Which brings us to Roger Williams. Williams is a Puritan minister who, how shall we put this, has opinions. He believes in separating church and state, treating native people with fairness, and allowing actual freedom of conscience. Naturally, they banish him. So, he wanders off into the wilderness and founds a new settlement, Providence, in what will become Rhode Island, a place for the misfits, rebels, and thinkers. It's not a vacation destination, but it has spirit. By the 1630s, people begin whispering about Salem. Witchcraft, they say. Ominous dreams, livestock behaving badly, children seeing things. You glance at the sky and wonder how long reason can hold. But the infamous trials haven't started yet. For now, the seeds are merely being sown. And in the background, the land shifts uneasily. The native tribes are watching the English settlements multiply like over-caffeinated mushrooms. Territories shrink, promises blur. Still, for this brief sliver of time, an uneasy peace lingers. You walk through a barn lit by candles, where a boy learns to read from the Bible and a girl practices writing her name with chalk on wood. Somewhere a minister is thundering about brimstone. Somewhere else, someone's quietly questioning whether maybe, just maybe, dancing isn't evil. A little-known quirk. The early colonies had a law requiring each town to hire a schoolmaster if they had 50 families. The goal? So children could read the scriptures. Of course, kids being kids, they probably used their slates to draw stick figure monsters during math. As the section ends, you glance back at Plymouth, where wind-worn fences creak, and where survival has turned into structure. The colony didn't flourish. Not yet. But it endured. And sometimes, that's the louder miracle. It is the summer of 1643. The air in New England is thick with sap, sermon smoke, and the faint tension of neighbours who've been arguing about land boundaries for 2 decades. You walk between fields and forests, past meeting houses and fences made of crooked logs, into a world that now has structure and an ever-expanding cast of characters. New colonies are rising like chapters in a book being written by people who refuse to agree on punctuation. To the south, in Maryland, there's a surprising twist. A colony founded by Catholics. That's right, Catholics. In Protestant England's shadow. It's the brainchild of George Calvert, aka Lord Baltimore, who envisioned a place where his faith wouldn't be met with pitchforks. His son Cecil picks up the mission, and in 1634, settlers arrived to build St. Mary's City. For a while, Maryland becomes a fragile dance between Protestants and Catholics, like a theological seesaw in a thunderstorm. Historians still argue whether Maryland was truly a haven or just politely chaotic. Meanwhile, Rhode Island flourishes in its roguish way. Roger Williams' little experiment in tolerance attracts misfits, thinkers, and people who talk too much in church. It's the colony equivalent of the no shoes, no shirt, no problem sign, except with theological pamphlets. Just north, Connecticut emerges, full of Puritans who think Massachusetts is too strict, which is saying something. They draft the Fundamental Orders, considered by some as the first written constitution in the New World. It's short, dense, and reads like it was composed during a debate with 5 people talking at once. And the Dutch? Oh yes, the Dutch are here too. They've carved out New Netherland, a trading colony that includes the bustling outpost of New Amsterdam. Spoiler, this will become New York, but for now, it smells of herring, freedom, and multilingual confusion. The Dutch aren't overly fussy. They allow all sorts to live there. Jews, Lutherans, Quakers. Their motto seems to be, buy, sell, live, just don't be boring. But England, always with an eye for real estate, is watching. By 1664, the English sail into New Amsterdam's harbour and casually tell the Dutch to hand it over. The Dutch governor, Peter Stuyvesant, with his famous wooden leg and grumpy disposition, glares at the invading ships. He's ready to fight. The townspeople, however, are ready to not get blown up. They surrender with the enthusiasm of people late for lunch. Thus, New York is born, named after the Duke of York, who probably didn't even like bagels. Further south, the Carolinas begin to stir. Split into north and south only later, this region starts as a lush experiment in grand estates, rice plantations, and very confusing governance. The swampy terrain makes it hard to build anything but mosquitoes. Yet the promise of land draws in settlers, some from England, others from Barbados, bringing knowledge of sugar, slavery, and how to look sweaty while rich. A strange idea creeps into the foundation here. A hierarchy based not on birth, but race. Laws begin to define what freedoms belong to whom. Africans, brought into labour on rice plantations, find themselves caught in a tightening web. What began as vague indenture hardens into chattel slavery. The gears of the future creak into motion, slow and chilling. Back in New England, tensions brew, not just with the land, but with the people who were here first. The Pequot War in the 1630s was brutal and ended with the near destruction of the Pequot tribe, but it was only a prelude. As more towns crop up, more forests are cleared, and more livestock trample cornfields. The relationships between colonists and native nations stretch thin. You hear stories around fires, of dreams warning of blood, of strangers with iron tools and unfamiliar diseases. The land holds these stories like roots, twisting under the surface, waiting. And still, Colonists keep coming. They bring seeds and scriptures, axes and ideals, hopes pinned to ships that keep sailing across the Atlantic like postcards from a parent who doesn't want to move in, but keeps calling. A quirky detail? In colonial New Haven, blue laws were posted on public boards. They outlawed everything from playing cards to missing church. One law even banned beards longer than 6 inches. Somewhere in Connecticut, a barber was probably considered a public safety officer. As this chapter draws to a close, you wander into a tavern in a Massachusetts village. A man argues about land claims. A woman rolls her eyes over cider. A child reads aloud from a hornbook, her voice rising over the fire's crackle. The colonies are no longer experiments. They are realities, conflicted, messy, expanding realities. And behind every tree, every sermon, every ship that arrives with trembling passengers, history leans in, waiting to see what they'll do next. It is autumn 1675. The leaves are turning fire-coloured in the forests of New England. Beneath them, the crunch of boots and moccasins echo in uneven rhythm, because now the woods are no longer just whispering stories. They're preparing for a storm. You're walking through the dense underbrush alongside a colonial scout who's absolutely sure he saw movement 10 feet back. He's wrong, but he says it with such confidence you half believe him anyway. The region is caught in the grip of King Philip's War, one of the most destructive conflicts in colonial America. Per capita, more lives were lost than in the Civil War, just with fewer uniforms and more arguing about who started it. The King Philip in question? Not a monarch from Europe, but the English name given to Metacom, the Wampanoag chief. His father, Massasoit, had once made peace with the Pilgrims. But times had changed. Lands were disappearing. Treaties were bending like cheap nails. Metacom had had enough. Raids begin. Settlements burn. Colonists retaliate. Native villages are attacked. What starts as tension becomes all-out chaos. The war ends with Metacom's death, but really, it marks something else. The end of any major native resistance in southern New England. A chapter closes, and not neatly. And while the musket smoke still hangs in the air, another drama plays out, quieter, colder. To the north and west, the fur trade is turning the continent into one enormous fur-lined negotiation. You step into the cool morning mist of the Great Lakes region, where French trappers called coureurs de bois slip through the wilderness with canoes and cargo. Beavers are the gold of this frontier, fashioned into hats that every European noble insists they can't live without. There are even rumours of fashion riots in Paris involving hat shortages. Historians still argue if that's true, but it's fun to imagine. French outposts, Quebec, Montreal, Detroit, dot the northern territories. Unlike the English, who build towns like Lego bricks, the French build relationships. Alliances form with tribes like the Huron and Algonquin, tied by trade, intermarriage, and religion. Meanwhile, the English expand from the eastern seaboard with that classic colonial mix of confidence and poor directions. They link up with the Iroquois Confederacy, an alliance of powerful native nations who aren't looking for friendship so much as strategy. The Iroquois are sharp. They play both sides. For now. One of the more eyebrow-raising moments in this period, the Albany Plan of Union, drafted in 1754 by, guess who, Benjamin Franklin. It proposed uniting the colonies under one council for defense. It was rejected, of course. Too early, too centralized, too much potential for shared taxes. But the cartoon Franklin drew for it, a chopped-up snake labeled Join or Die, has stuck around in history classrooms longer than most gym teachers. But we're not quite there yet. Back in the southern colonies, tension simmers like a stew left too long on the fire. Plantation economies are booming, especially in the Carolinas, where rice fields sprawl out like green checkerboards. These fields are worked not just by enslaved Africans, but by knowledge. Skills in irrigation and cultivation brought over the Atlantic against their will. No one mentions that in polite company, of course. But it's true. Charleston is rising, a port city full of spice, sugar, and gossip. Ships sail in heavy with goods and sail out heavier with profit. The smell of molasses lingers in the air like a secret nobody wants to explain. And then a story tucked in the corner of a map. Bacon's Rebellion. Yes, it's really called that. No, it's not about breakfast. In 1676, a hot-headed Virginian named Nathaniel Bacon leads a ragtag force against the colonial governor, angry over frontier defense and class divisions. Bacon burns Jamestown, yes, the whole thing, and dies of dysentery shortly after. The rebellion fizzles, but it shakes the planter class to its core. They start wondering, maybe it's better to keep the poor folks divided by race than united by anger. And so, laws are passed. Slavery hardens. The blueprint for future inequity is written in ash and fear. And yet, amid the strife, there's music. You sit on a porch in a small coastal village, listening to a fiddler play a melody caught between Ireland and Africa. The notes drift out over the marshes, carrying both joy and memory. Children chase each other near the docks. A woman sells sweet cakes dusted with nutmeg. Life goes on. A lesser-known fact, some colonists believed comets were signs of bad omens. When Halley's Comet made an appearance in the late 1600s, churchgoers panicked, assuming it foretold apocalypse. A few ministers tried to reassure them. Others wrote sermons just in case it was the end. And still, the colonies grow. Paths become roads. Houses become towns. Fences extend into fields that were once ancient hunting grounds. The world is tilting, slowly, undeniably, towards something new. But beneath the surface, under the sermons and tavern songs, you can feel it. The land remembers. The rivers remember. And in quiet corners of the forest, stories from before the ships still echo. It is a humid morning in July, 1701. Your boots sink slightly into the soft, dark soil of the South Carolina lowlands. Dragonflies skim the surface of muddy creeks, and the air smells of jasmine, livestock, and the heavy breath of a plantation just waking up. This isn't New England anymore. This is the Deep South, where every breeze seems to carry gossip, and every corner of the land is stitched with contradictions. The southern colonies are growing fast, but differently. While the North writes sermons and smuggles rum, the South is building kingdoms out of rice, indigo, and very questionable ethics. You pass by a sprawling plantation, where the fields stretch farther than the eye can track. Neat rows of rice sway in the sun, their roots submerged in water systems designed with uncanny precision. Who built these irrigation dikes? Not the European landowners. The credit belongs to enslaved Africans, many from the rice coast of West Africa, who brought generations of agricultural knowledge with them, even though they never meant to bring anything at all. This is a truth that rarely makes it into textbooks. The economy of Carolina doesn't just rest on slave labor. It depends on the skills, farming systems, and climate sense of people torn from their homeland. It's their science, unpaid, unthanked, that makes the land yield. Meanwhile, in Georgia, a strange idea is forming. Enter James Oglethorpe, a name that sounds like he should own a mansion and a powdered wig, but instead he dreams up a utopia. In 1732, Georgia is founded not for plantations or preachers, but for debtors. The plan? No slavery, no rum, no lawyers, a sort of polite boot camp for England's poor. It lasts about 15 minutes. Within a decade, the utopia unravels like a wool sock in a dog's mouth. Colonists demand slaves. Rum shows up anyway. Lawyers sneak in under aliases. Georgia becomes just another southern colony, ambitious, rich in soil, and increasingly tangled in the web of forced labor. Further west, Spanish missions dot the edge of Florida and creep up through present-day Texas. These outposts are quiet but determined, spreading Catholicism and language in equal measure. You walk into one near San Antonio, where adobe walls glow red in the evening light. Inside, a priest sings in Latin while children trace the shape of stars on rough clay tiles. But not everyone is praying. Farther north, native tribes are pushing back. The Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw navigate a world of shifting allegiances. Some trade with the English. Others with the French. All of them know what's at stake. Their lands are chessboards, and the game is being played by people who never learned the rules properly. At this point, the southern mosaic becomes even more experimental. French settlers from Louisiana begin drifting eastward, bringing jazz seeds in their pockets and recipes with too much seasoning. African cultural traditions take root too. Gullah Geechee communities form along the coast, blending African, European, and native customs into something totally unique. Their language is rich, rhythmic, and resists translation. Their folktales? They're gold. Take Br'er Rabbit, for example, the clever trickster who always outwits stronger foes. He's not just comic relief. He's a lesson in survival, in bending without breaking, in getting the last word when your voice has been stolen. Historians still argue whether Br'er Rabbit was purely African, or partly Cherokee too. Either way, he hops across cultural borders like no one's watching. And what of the cities? Charleston is now the South's jewel, a port city pulsing with wealth, dance, and debate. You step into a salon where someone's arguing about Enlightenment philosophy while also trying to order pickled oysters. There's theatre here, and elegance, but underneath it all, a business of bondage. Charleston is a major slave port. That's the part not written on the travel brochures. Still, the colony thrives on contradiction. On Sunday, church bells ring from steeples so tall they nearly trip over the clouds. By Monday, the same people who sang hymns are haggling over human lives at auction. It's not hypocrisy, they insist. It's economy. And thus, the twisted justifications multiply. One odd footnote: some early colonists in Georgia believed silk farming would be their ticket to riches. Mulberry trees were planted, silkworms were imported. The worms promptly died, the trees withered, and everyone went back to rice and cotton. Still, for a brief moment, the South almost went full fashion house. And while all this is happening, you feel a different kind of wind start to stir, not from the coast, but from inland. A restlessness, a slow awareness that the balance of power is about to tilt. Because even though the South is booming, it's also fragile, held together by laws, profit, and fear. You can see it in the wary glances of merchants, in the sermons laced with warnings, in the songs sung by field hands under their breath. As dusk settles over the marshlands, fireflies blink across the rice paddies like tiny stars rehearsing for their big night. You sit on a wooden stoop and listen to the frogs sing a song older than all the colonies combined. For a moment, it feels still. But somewhere, just over the horizon, the next century is waiting, with its ink pots, rifles, and declarations. The colonies think they know who they are. They're about to find out just how wrong they are. It is spring, 1725. The cobbled streets of Boston shine after a morning rain, the puddles reflecting church steeples and chimneys like a watercolor sketch smudged by a child's hand. Somewhere nearby, a printing press coughs into life, spitting out broadsheets about ship schedules, trade rumours, and someone's runaway goat. You pause at a bakery window where loaves rise with the confidence of sermons, and the air smells of yeast and ambition. The colonies are older now, wiser in some ways, but definitely louder. Port cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston are booming. Places where you can buy molasses, listen to heated debate, and accidentally start a philosophical argument while ordering fish. Ships come and go daily. Cargo bays brim with sugar, cod, tea, fur, fabric, and everything in between. The Atlantic trade triangle is in full swing. You trace its invisible shape in the sky. Goods from Europe to Africa, enslaved people from Africa to the Americas, raw materials from the colonies back to Europe. It's a machine. A deeply flawed, humming machine with sails and sorrow woven into its gears. And somewhere, in the middle of all this commerce, comes a storm, but not one of cannons or battles. Number. This one begins with a whisper. They call it the First Great Awakening. Picture this: a field, somewhere near Northampton, Massachusetts. A crowd gathers around a wooden pulpit. There's no roof, no hymnals, just a firebrand preacher named Jonathan Edwards, gripping the sides of the lectern like it might float away if he lets go. His voice booms across the meadow. He speaks of sin, salvation, and eternal judgment. Not in Latin, not in droning monotones, but like someone whose house is on fire, and he wants you to get out now. The congregation weeps, some collapse, some shout "Amen" with such force it startles the cows. Across the colonies, more preachers follow. George Whitefield, an English revivalist, travels from town to town, drawing crowds so large he has to preach outdoors. His eyes are said to shine like twin lanterns. Ben Franklin once attended a sermon out of curiosity and left without a single coin in his pocket. The man had donated everything on him. What's remarkable is that this revival breaks norms. It challenges churches, pastors, traditions. It says salvation is for everyone, men, women, the enslaved, even, gasp, people who don't own land. It gets messy, fast, and not everyone is thrilled. Old school ministers call it emotional chaos. Hysteria, they grumble. Historians still debate whether it laid the groundwork for democracy or just increased hand-waving during sermons. But either way, something shifts. People start thinking they have a direct line to the divine, no priest required. And once you believe that, well, who else might you stop listening to? Back in Boston, taverns buzz with talk not just of heaven but of habeas corpus. Enlightenment ideas sneak into the colonies like stowaways. In a dusty corner bookstore, you spot pamphlets quoting John Locke and Voltaire right next to a recipe for pickled cabbage. Meanwhile, in the backcountry, Scotch-Irish settlers are carving new lives from the wilderness. These aren't city folk. They build log cabins, argue with trees, and name their kids after biblical warriors. They settle in the Appalachians, fending off bears, British taxes, and boredom in equal measure. Down south, churches and taverns multiply, often on the same street. You could get baptized in the morning and brawl by dinner. The line between sin and celebration, paper-thin and soaked in cider. Amidst all this, something curious takes root: the colonial press. Small printing presses begin spreading ideas like wildfire. Not just news, but opinions, satire, local gossip, occasional slander. You pass by one in Philadelphia, where a young man named Benjamin Franklin is setting type. He's clever, sarcastic, and just a bit too obsessed with kites. His paper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, prints everything from meteorological theories to essays on flatulence. Yes, flatulence. Franklin believed nothing was too small or too strange for serious inquiry. A fun tidbit: in 1735, a German-born printer named John Peter Zenger is put on trial in New York for criticizing the governor in his paper. He wins. And though America isn't a country yet, the concept of free press suddenly has teeth. At the same time, Quakers in Pennsylvania are raising eyebrows by speaking out against slavery. Not many people listen yet. But the seed is planted. And once a seed is planted, well, we know how roots work. You end your day sitting on a wooden bench in Newport, watching ships rock gently in the harbour. A boy tosses pebbles into the sea. A woman walks by humming a hymn. Overhead, a lantern flickers on the porch of a tavern where three men are loudly arguing whether a beaver pelt is an acceptable anniversary gift. Somewhere out there, another preacher sharpens his next sermon. Somewhere else, a printer adds ink to his type. The colonies are growing, not just in size, but in thought. And when people start thinking, history tends to follow closely behind. It is February of 1754. The Allegheny Mountains stretch like a jagged spine across the horizon. Snow has fallen, layering the wilderness in a silent white shroud. Beneath the trees, muskets clatter and maps unfold. You're with a young Virginian, barely 21, his coat too crisp and his eyes too eager. His name is George Washington, and he has no idea that one day people will put him on currency and awkwardly named bridges. Right now he's just trying to deliver a letter. The letter is from the governor of Virginia, politely asking the French to vacate their newly built forts in the Ohio River Valley. The French, being French, respond with equal politeness, then build another fort. Tensions rise faster than yeast in a summer bakery. And thus begins the French and Indian War, known globally as the 7 Years' War. But here, it lasts 9 years, because America always likes doing things with a little extra flair. The stage is vast: forests, rivers, frozen lakes. The French ally with native tribes like the Huron and Algonquin. The British lean on the Iroquois Confederacy, who wisely play both sides like skilled chess masters, though the chessboard, sadly, is their ancestral homeland. You find yourself at Fort Necessity, a muddy patch of poorly chosen real estate. Washington, enthusiastic but untested, builds a fort in a meadow shaped like a soup bowl. When it rains, the trench floods. When the French arrive, things go poorly. A battle breaks out. Washington surrenders and accidentally signs a document in French admitting to an assassination. Oops. The war spirals into a full-blown continental conflict. Redcoats march through forests in their bright scarlet uniforms, which is not the best camouflage in a place where deer blend better than generals. Guerrilla warfare becomes the norm. Surprise ambushes, scouting raids. No set-piece battles, just the wild and the wounded. You ride with General Edward Braddock, a British officer with a powdered wig and absolutely no sense of how to fight in forests. In 1755, he marches toward Fort Duquesne and is ambushed near the Monongahela River. The British fall apart. Braddock is mortally wounded. Washington somehow survives, though 4 bullets tear through his coat. Historians still argue whether divine luck or sheer clumsiness spared him. Meanwhile, far from the gunpowder and pine trees, colonial politics begin to twitch with new energy. In Albany, New York, delegates from 7 colonies meet in what is called the Albany Congress. Their goal? Form a unified defense plan. Benjamin Franklin, never one to shy away from group projects, proposes the Albany Plan of Union. It suggests a central government for the colonies, just enough to coordinate defense and taxation. The plan is brilliant. It is also unanimously rejected. Why? The colonies don't want to give up power. And Britain is suspicious of any unified talk. It's like offering everyone a group discount and watching them argue about who forgot their wallet. But Franklin's Join or Die cartoon, a sliced-up snake representing the colonies, becomes iconic. It is the first visual meme of American unity, and it sticks. Back on the battlefield, the war begins to shift. Enter William Pitt, the British Prime Minister, who pours resources into the colonies like a man gambling with someone else's money. British troops flood the New World. Fortresses are stormed, cities fall. In 1759, Quebec is captured after a dramatic cliff-climbing maneuver that would make any modern rock climber proud. By 1763, the war is over. Britain wins. France loses most of its North American holdings. Spain gains a bit. And native tribes, they get nothing except British forts moving onto their land. Which leads us directly to Pontiac's rebellion. You ride through the Great Lakes as Chief Pontiac, an Ottawa leader, gathers multiple tribes to resist British expansion. They capture forts, they ambush convoys, they shake colonial confidence. Eventually, the British respond with brutal force and an odd tactic. They distribute smallpox-infected blankets. Yes, really. It's one of the darker side notes of early biological warfare, and historians still recoil from the implications. To calm things down, and hopefully avoid more rebellions, the Crown issues the Proclamation of 1763. It draws an invisible line along the Appalachian Mountains, declaring that no colonists may settle west of it. The reaction? Not great. Colonists, especially those who fought in the war, feel cheated. We spilled blood to open that land, they grumble. And now we're locked out? They cross the line anyway, of course, because nothing motivates a frontiersman like being told to stay put. The war's financial aftermath is even more explosive. Britain, now swimming in debt, looks across the sea and starts seeing dollar signs painted on every colonial barn. If the colonies benefited from the war, shouldn't they help pay for it? Q. Taxes. But we're not there just yet. You return to the cities, where things seem off. There's a new kind of energy in the taverns. Merchants argue about duties. Pamphlets spread rumours. Ministers slip politics into sermons. Even the farmers start asking questions like, who exactly is running things around here? A humorous side note. During this time, a fad emerges among upper-class colonists for electric baths. Inspired by Franklin's experiments, people begin sitting in wooden tubs with static charges to treat everything from gout to melancholy. The results were mixed. Shocking, even. As the section closes, you find yourself on a hill above Boston. Below, ships unload cargo, while church bells ring out across the bay. A boy walks by balancing a loaf of bread on his head, whistling a tune that doesn't yet have a name. A group of children chases a hoop down the street, their laughter echoing between stone walls. The colonies are changing. Not just growing, but becoming aware of themselves. For the first time, they begin to feel less like scattered outposts and more like something connected, something restless. The war is over, but the real trouble is just beginning to stir. It is March 1765. The frost hasn't quite left the cobblestones of Philadelphia, and you can feel it, something stirring underfoot that isn't just spring. Merchants glance over their shoulders. Printers work late into the night. Tavern owners polish mugs like they're preparing for a duel, and street preachers pause mid-sermon to ask, "Did you hear what Parliament just passed?" The colonies, still catching their breath from the war, are about to get a lesson in taxation, British style. Enter the Stamp Act. For the first time, Parliament declares that the colonies must pay a direct tax on printed materials, everything from newspapers to legal papers to playing cards. Yes, even playing cards. So now, even poker night comes with political implications. You walk into a print shop in Boston, where the air is heavy with ink and indignation. The printer mutters curses between lines of type. The pamphlet he's setting reads like a war cry dressed as a newsletter. "No taxation without representation," it says, a phrase that rolls off tongues like a hymn, but hits like a hammer. Protests erupt from New York to Charleston. Effigies of tax collectors are strung up in trees. Tar and feathering, an activity not recommended by any modern spa, is suddenly a real occupational hazard. The Sons of Liberty, an underground group of merchants, craftsmen, and occasional philosophers, start organizing. Their meetings are secret. Their ideas are louder than the church bells. Britain, startled by the colonial uproar, repeals the Stamp Act, but then throws in a declaratory act for good measure. It basically says, "Fine, we're removing the tax. But just so you know, we still own you." It's the legislative equivalent of a passive-aggressive note on the fridge. And then, more taxes. The Townshend Acts arrive in 1767. Glass, lead, paint, tea, all taxed. Colonists respond with boycotts. Suddenly, homespun cloth is fashionable, and British tea is treated like it personally insulted everyone's grandmother. Colonial women play a huge role here. They sew. They protest. They organize spinning bees with all the social firepower of a modern influencer campaign. In Virginia, a young lawyer named Patrick Henry starts making waves. He stands in the House of Burgesses and declares, "If this be treason, make the most of it." You half expect a violin sting and slow-motion shot. The man could monologue. Meanwhile, in Boston, because of course it's Boston, tensions rise to a boil. British troops are stationed in the city to maintain order. The locals don't love it. You pass a tavern where a soldier tries to buy bread and ends up in a shouting match with a baker who claims, "We need no redcoats here." It's a pun. The baker's proud of it. The soldier is not. Then comes the Boston Massacre. It's March 5th, 1770. Snowballs fly. Bells ring. A crowd gathers. Words are exchanged. Sharp, bitter, and desperate. Someone throws a club. A gun goes off. 5 colonists fall. The British soldiers claim panic. The colonists claim murder. The newspapers claim everything. One of those newspapers? Published by Paul Revere, who engraves the moment as propaganda art. It shows a neat firing line and helpless citizens. Never mind that the truth was much more chaotic. The engraving spreads like wildfire, shaping public opinion long before going viral was even a concept. Oddly enough, the lawyer who defends the British soldiers is John Adams, a future president defending the unpopular, because he believes in the law. The soldiers are mostly acquitted, and Adams earns a reputation for integrity, even among people who now side-eye him at parties. Then comes the real kicker: tea. The Tea Act of 1773 isn't technically a new tax. It actually lowers the cost of British tea, but still includes the hated tax. Colonists smell a trap. Cheap tea? They scoff. Next, you'll be handing out free stamps. And so, on December 16th, 1773, a group of colonists dresses as Mohawk warriors, not to disrespect the tribe, but to signal a distinctly American identity. They board British ships in Boston Harbor and dump 342 chests of tea into the water. The harbor smells like oversteeped defiance for weeks. Britain is not amused. They respond with the coercive acts, or as the colonists call them, the intolerable acts. Boston's port is closed. Local governments are stripped of power. Soldiers can now be housed in private homes. Which, let's be honest, is a terrible Airbnb experience for everyone involved. The colonies start talking, not just in pamphlets or taverns, but in full councils. In 1774, the First Continental Congress convenes in Philadelphia. 12 colonies send delegates, Georgia's fashionably late to the revolution. They draft grievances. They plan boycotts. They agree to meet again. It's like a rehearsal dinner for independence. A quirky tidbit. At these early meetings, delegates still toast the king. Long live George III, they say, right before signing documents telling him to mind his own business. Historians still debate whether this was diplomacy or just deeply confused manners. Meanwhile, Minutemen train in village greens. Muskets are cleaned, lanterns are checked, rumours fly faster than pigeons. And in a church tower in Concord, someone's already polishing the bell rope for what comes next. Back in Virginia, Patrick Henry takes the floor again. "Give me liberty," he says. Or give me... well, you know the rest. The room doesn't erupt in cheers. It freezes. Every man there knows they're standing at the edge of something irreversible. The colonies haven't broken away yet. Not officially. Not loudly. But the edges of the map are curling. The parchment is getting hot. And across the Atlantic in Parliament, someone sighs and mutters, "They'll calm down." It is April 1775. You are standing on a road just outside Lexington, Massachusetts. The sky is bruised with morning haze, and the grass is still wet with dew. But the air, it's sharp, alert, like even the wind knows that something historic is about to walk through the door. Suddenly, hoofbeats. A rider tears past, cloak flapping like a sail. You hear him cry, "The British are coming!" But actually, that's not what he said. Paul Revere probably yelled something more like, "The regulars are out," because shouting about British troops in a town full of British citizens would have been a tad confusing. Still, the message spreads like wildfire across New England. Church bells ring. Muskets are lifted down from over fireplaces. Farmers, blacksmiths, and teenagers pull on boots and run toward Lexington Green. No one's sure what they're about to do. They just know it's important. Then, the shot. To this day, no one knows who fired it. The shot heard round the world, they call it, a poetic name for a chaotic moment. On April 19th, British troops confront colonial militia. A skirmish breaks out. By the end of the day, men lie still on both sides, and the Revolutionary War has officially begun. You ride along dusty trails toward Concord, where British troops search for gunpowder and colonial leaders. But they find resistance instead. Minutemen, hiding behind fences and trees, pick them off one by one during the retreat. It's not a battle, it's a swarm, and the redcoats don't like being stung. Back in Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress meets in a room that smells of ink, sweat, and destiny. They argue. They stall. They wonder if they should write a strongly worded letter or start raising armies. Eventually, they choose both. And so, George Washington, tall, dignified, and already tired, is appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He arrives in Cambridge, sword gleaming, coat uncreased, and immediately begins trying to turn volunteers into soldiers. He learns quickly that command is not about swagger, It's about improvisation and patience. Meanwhile, across the pond, King George III is reading reports and muttering things that probably wouldn't pass modern HR standards. To the Crown, this is a rebellion, a tantrum, something to be disciplined, not negotiated. In Boston, the siege begins. Colonial forces surround the city while British troops dig in. In June, the Battle of Bunker Hill erupts. Technically fought on Breed's Hill, because colonial cartography is charmingly imprecise, it becomes one of the bloodiest clashes of the early war. The British win, but only after suffering heavy losses. One redcoat officer reportedly mutters, "Another victory like that, and we are undone." Still, the colonies don't immediately declare independence. In 1775, the Olive Branch Petition is sent to the king, an awkward, heartfelt attempt to say, "Let's work it out." The king? He doesn't read it. Instead, he declares the colonies to be in open rebellion. By winter, you're with Washington's army, shivering outside Quebec, trying to convince French Canadians to join the cause. Spoiler, they don't. The invasion fails, smallpox spreads, and Washington's dreams of an easy win melt faster than snow in April. But not all is grim. Thomas Paine, a radical Englishman with a quill and a temper, publishes Common Sense in early 1776. It's fiery, direct, and sold in numbers that would make modern influencers jealous. It argues, simply and powerfully, that monarchy is absurd and independence is common sense. The colonies lap it up. Even farmers quote it while shoveling manure. A fun fact, Paine originally wanted to call it Plain Truth. A friend suggested Common Sense instead, which clearly won the branding war. And so the drumbeat quickens. By summer, the idea of independence no longer sounds like a rebellion, it sounds like inevitability. You walk through Philadelphia, where rumors swirl like pastry steam. Men slip in and out of taverns with sealed envelopes. Women discuss politics over sewing circles. Even children eavesdrop with purpose. Then, in the sweltering heat of July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress votes for independence. 2 days later, they approve the declaration, and on July 4th, it is officially adopted. Fireworks don't light up the sky, those come much later, but bells ring, crowds cheer, and in every colony the word spreads, we are no longer subjects. You stand near Independence Hall as Thomas Jefferson's words are read aloud. We hold these truths to be self-evident. The crowd is quiet. Some smile, some cry. Others just nod, as if something inside them had always known this day would come. And then, back to war. In New York, Washington braces for British retaliation. What arrives is the largest naval armada the world has ever seen, commanded by General William Howe. Thousands of redcoats disembark on Staten Island, shiny and spotless like parade floats with bayonets. The Battle of Long Island follows. It's a disaster. Washington's army is outflanked and outnumbered. But under cover of night and fog, always fog, he leads a miraculous escape across the East River. He retreats, but he survives. That becomes his pattern. Retreat, regroup, resist. Autumn turns bitter. The army dwindles. Morale slips like frost off a tent flap. Then comes the moment that every American child learns before they can spell Republic, crossing the Delaware. It's December 25th. Most troops are barefoot, wrapped in rags. They cross an ice-choked river in silence. Reach Trenton. Surprise a group of Hessians, German mercenaries half asleep after Christmas, and win. Suddenly, hope isn't a fantasy. It's a footnote turned headline. And speaking of the Hessians, a quirky detail. One was caught mid-card game during the attack and reportedly tried to finish his hand before fleeing. Some priorities never change. By year's end, the war has shifted again. It's no longer just a question of rebellion. It's a fight for legitimacy. A battle of logistics, patience, and belief. The British are powerful. The colonies are scattered. But the idea has taken root. And once an idea starts marching, not even the world's largest empire can stand still. It is the spring of 1783. The cherry trees are blooming in Virginia, and the war is ending, not with fanfare, but with the kind of exhausted silence that follows a long and uncertain gamble. Soldiers limp home, cannons fall quiet, and beneath all the rubble and parchment, a question forms. Now what? The Treaty of Paris is signed in September. Britain formally recognizes American independence. Boundaries are redrawn. The Mississippi River becomes the new western edge of the nation. Florida returns to Spanish hands like a guest no one really knew what to do with in the first place. And France, America's sometimes patient ally, goes home with a receipt and mixed feelings. But while diplomats pop corks in Europe, things in the new United States are less celebratory. You stand in a muddy camp where unpaid soldiers stare at tents with holes in them. Many haven't received their wages in years. Supplies are scarce. Promises? Scarcer. Mutinies flare. In Newburgh, New York, a group of officers plots to pressure Congress for payment. Only a heartfelt speech from George Washington, glasses in hand, voice trembling, manages to cool the embers. He says, "I have grown grey in your service," and they believe him. Because if there's one man whose sincerity can hold a room, it's Washington. That speech prevents a possible military coup. Historians still debate just how close the new republic came to crumbling before it even stood. And so the soldiers return to farms. The war is over, but the unravelling begins. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first attempt at government, are proving to be about as sturdy as wet cardboard. States act like bickering siblings, each with their own currency, tariffs, and ideas about borders. Congress can't tax. There's no president, no judiciary, just committees, confusion, and some very nervous merchants. In Massachusetts, farmers begin to revolt. Taxes are high, debt is everywhere. Enter Daniel Shays, a former soldier turned reluctant rebel. In 1786, he leads a group of farmers to seize courthouses and protest foreclosures. It becomes Shays' Rebellion, and it shakes the foundations of the new country. This wasn't a royal tyranny, it was their own government now, and it wasn't working. You sit in a Boston tavern and overhear two men arguing about the rebellion. One says it proves liberty is fragile. The other says it proves Americans won't take injustice lying down. You nod at both and sip something that tastes like fermented optimism. Then comes 1787. A constitutional convention is called in Philadelphia. The goal? Fix the articles. The result? They throw the whole thing out. What emerges is a blueprint for a stronger union, complete with a president, checks and balances, and the ability to collect taxes, because nothing motivates governance like unpaid bills. You wander the halls of Independence Hall again. The room hums with debate. Madison writes, Franklin jokes, Hamilton argues until the furniture gets nervous. Large states and small states fight like cats in a sack over representation. Slavery is tiptoed around, compromised on, avoided, folded into phrases like 3/5 and importation clause. It's not solved. It's simply parked. Eventually, the Constitution is signed. But not everyone's thrilled. The anti-federalists smell tyranny in all this federal power. They want guarantees. So, the Bill of Rights is promised. 10 amendments to protect speech, religion, the press, and the sacred right to grumble about Congress. In 1789, George Washington becomes the first president of the United States. He takes the oath with one hand on the Bible and the other holding every hope and fear in the country. He doesn't want the job, but everyone knows no one else can hold it without making a mess. A new capital is chosen, Washington, D.C., though it's still a swampy dream at this point. You walk through New York City, which briefly serves as the capital, where carriages rattle over cobblestones and cabinet members argue about national banks with the energy of caffeinated philosophers. Then comes a moment that will shape the nation forever. In 1793, Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. It's a crank-operated machine that separates cotton fibers from seeds. Simple, effective, and completely disastrous for enslaved people in the South. Suddenly, cotton becomes king. plantations explode in size. Slavery, which had seemed to some like it might fade, now has a financial anchor. By 1796, Washington is tired, really tired. He steps down after 2 terms, warning the nation to avoid foreign entanglements and partisan politics. Naturally, the country immediately ignores both pieces of advice. John Adams takes over. He's sharp, stubborn, and perpetually annoyed that he isn't George Washington. During his presidency, the Alien and Sedition Acts cause an uproar. Freedom of speech takes a beating. Immigrants are eyed suspiciously. Newspapers get sued for sass. A curious footnote: a New England farmer was arrested under the Sedition Act for saying the president was old, toothless, and too fond of pomp, which might be fair, but still. In 1800, power shifts peacefully for the first time. Thomas Jefferson wins the presidency, and Adams leaves office without tanks, tantrums, or fanfare. The world watches in disbelief. A republic, still wobbling on baby legs, just passed its first real test. Then Jefferson makes a bold move. In 1703, he purchases the Louisiana Territory from France. Just like that, the United States doubles in size. For a song and a handshake and $15 million, an empire is born. You climb a hill in the newly claimed West, overlooking plains that stretch to the horizon. Buffalo graze, rivers coil like silver ribbons. The land is rich with beauty, promise, and people. Native tribes still roam this land. They are not consulted. They are simply included in maps that never asked their permission. And thus begins westward expansion. But not before one final memorable expedition, Lewis and Clark, tasked with mapping the new frontier. You join them at the Missouri River, watching as they trudge through forests, cross mountains, and stare wide-eyed at the Pacific. Their journals fill with notes on wildlife, rivers, and endless logistical headaches. Alongside them, Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman, acts as guide, translator, and symbol of diplomacy in a world full of misunderstandings. The colonies are gone now, absorbed into a republic that's still learning how to walk without falling. But in the valleys of Kentucky, the swamps of Mississippi, and the echoing canyons of the West, you hear the heartbeat of something new. Not perfect, not peaceful, but very, very alive. It is the dawn of 1810. The rising sun casts a honey-coloured glow across the frontier, where smoke curls from scattered homesteads and rifle shots echo from faraway hills, not in anger, but in the daily rhythm of survival. America is growing again, spilling westward like ink on an old parchment map. The line once drawn at the Appalachian Mountains, long since ignored. You ride alongside a mule-drawn wagon headed toward Tennessee, a land of tall trees, fertile soil, and enthusiastic mosquitoes. Families move with little more than quilts, seeds, and the strange courage that only comes from not knowing what lies ahead. They follow dusty trails and rivers that don't yet appear on maps. They sing hymns, swat bugs, and invent curse words every time a wheel breaks. This westward migration isn't just a movement of people. It's a national obsession. Manifest destiny won't become an official phrase until the 1840s, but the belief is already here. That this land, this wild, endless, untamed continent, was meant to be theirs. But not everyone agrees. The Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole tribes watch with increasing unease. They've survived wars, treaties, broken promises, and politely worded lies. Now, settlers are pouring into their lands with deeds and muskets. In Georgia, the Cherokee adopt a bold strategy: assimilation. They build towns, print newspapers, develop a written language, thanks to Sequoyah, a silversmith who invents a syllabary that transforms oral tradition into text. They adopt European-style farming, wear suits, and draft a constitution. The message is clear: we're a nation too. But the land still speaks louder than their diplomacy. You pass through Florida, where things are getting unusually spicy. Spain still technically owns it, but it's like a rental nobody's maintaining. Escaped enslaved people flee there. Native tribes, including the Seminoles, use it as a base to resist American expansion. The US government eyes it like a pie cooling on a neighbor's windowsill. Enter Andrew Jackson. General, land-hungry and perpetually scowling, Jackson leads military raids into Spanish Florida, claiming he's chasing rebels. He burns villages, captures forts, and then, with the diplomacy of a runaway cannon, he simply stays. Spain, exhausted and broke, cedes Florida in 1819 through the Adams-Onis Treaty, a win for the USA, disaster for native people. And while Florida joins the fold, another story unfolds to the southwest. Texas. At this point, it's still part of Mexico, but American settlers are arriving in large numbers, lured by cheap land and fewer questions. The Mexican government initially welcomes them, until it doesn't. By the 1830s, tensions rise. American settlers, many of whom brought enslaved labor with them against Mexican law, start grumbling about independence. The rumble becomes a roar. You arrive at the Alamo, a crumbling Spanish mission where a group of Texian rebels makes a doomed last stand against the Mexican army. The siege lasts 13 days. The defenders, Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, William Travis, become folk heroes. The phrase, "Remember the Alamo," echoes across the land like a drumbeat of defiance. Texas declares independence in 1836, and for nearly a decade becomes its own country, the Republic of Texas. With a flag, a president, and an attitude bigger than its borders. Historians still argue whether the US orchestrated this whole situation or just happened to benefit from it. Either way, the writing is on the wall. Texas will join the United States, just not yet. Back in the East, America keeps knitting itself together. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, all now part of the Union. Canals slice through the land, steamboats puff up rivers like water-bound dragons. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, connects New York to the Great Lakes, and suddenly goods and gossip can move like never before. In the taverns of Cincinnati, men argue over tariffs. In the markets of New Orleans, cotton is king, and jazz is a baby not yet born. In the hills of Kentucky, moonshine trickles into jars, and politics are discussed with fists and fiddles. But the real thread running through all of it? Land. Land is wealth. Land is identity. And land is running out, for native tribes. The Indian Removal Act, passed in 1830, becomes law under Andrew Jackson's presidency. He claims it will preserve native culture by moving tribes west of the Mississippi. What it really does is push entire nations off their ancestral homes, sometimes with the barrel of a musket, other times with the dry ink of forced treaties. The Trail of Tears begins. The Cherokee are marched westward in the cold, across hundreds of miles. Thousands die, of disease, starvation, exposure. You walk alongside the column and see mothers carrying infants, elders holding each other up, songs whispered to keep memories alive. It's not a migration, it's an erasure. Meanwhile, Missouri is causing a stir. In 1820, it applies for statehood as a slave state, threatening to tip the balance between free and slave states in Congress. The result? The Missouri Compromise. Missouri enters as a slave state, Maine as a free state, and a line is drawn across the country. Slavery allowed below, prohibited above. It's a temporary bandage, one applied with trembling hands. And still, the West calls. Wagon trains gather in St. Louis, preparing for the Oregon Trail. Families pack flour, bacon, rifles, and enough hope to fill a prairie. They chase dreams of land, independence, and that magical something whispered by every horizon, possibility. One humorous tidbit. On the trail, travelers were warned not to overpack. One woman, ignoring advice, brought a piano. By week 2, it was abandoned beside the trail, now known as Piano Hill. The only music there now is the wind through the grass. As this section closes, you watch a map unfold across a wooden table. Territories stretch, borders blur. But beneath every new name, Arkansas, Michigan, Iowa, lie older names, older paths, older stories. America believes it's building a new world, but it's also walking across one that never needed building. It is May of 1846. Dust swirls along the Santa Fe Trail, and wagon wheels grind over rock and root. You're sitting in the back of a covered wagon, flanked by barrels of salt pork and sacks of flour, while a boy hums a tune and ties knots in a leather strap. Ahead of you, the road vanishes into the horizon, a dry stretch of land that looks empty but is anything but. Welcome to Manifest Destiny Act 2. The Oregon Trail is alive with movement. Thousands of families, driven by land grants, tall tales, and the occasional misguided newspaper headline, pour westward. They brave swollen rivers, cholera, broken axles, and buffalo with attitude. They carve new settlements into a land already known and sacred to the Shoshone, Nez Perce, and Paiute, tribes who now watch the sky, unsure whether it still belongs to them. In every wagon train, there is hope, and also a lot of biscuits. Meanwhile, the government is watching the map and sharpening its pencils. Texas, after 10 years as its own scrappy, debt-ridden republic, officially joins the United States in 1845. Mexico is less than thrilled. Technically, they never acknowledged Texan independence to begin with, and now America has invited Texas to dinner without even asking if Mexico wanted to split the bill. War is brewing. In 1846, it begins. The Mexican-American War. President James K. Polk, a man with a surprisingly fierce belief in border lines, sends troops into the disputed zone between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. Shots are fired. Polk declares that American blood has been shed on American soil. Historians still argue if the soil in question was actually American at the time. Either way, war is on. You travel with General Zachary Taylor, whose nickname Old Rough and Ready sounds like a cowboy-themed breakfast cereal. His troops march into Mexico, fighting battles with awkward names like Monterrey and Buena Vista. Then comes Winfield Scott, who lands in Veracruz and marches straight to Mexico City in a campaign that's part conquest, part logistical nightmare. Mexico fights fiercely, but internal instability, supply issues, and a US military riding high on expansionist adrenaline eventually turn the tide. The war ends in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and suddenly the US owns a third of Mexico's former territory. California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona, parts of New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. It's a land jackpot, and the ink's barely dry when a whisper echoes across the continent. Gold. You rush to California, where in 1848, a man named James Marshall discovers gold at Sutter's Mill. At first, it's a local rumor. Then it spreads across wagons, newspapers, even across oceans. By 1849, the gold rush begins, and San Francisco transforms from sleepy outpost to chaotic boomtown almost overnight. You step into a saloon where languages collide, dust clings to everything, and men trade maps that may or may not be total nonsense. Chinese immigrants arrive by the thousands. So do miners from Peru, Germany, and France. California becomes a global melting pot in less time than it takes to boil beans over a campfire. But with the rush comes greed, lawlessness, and exploitation. Native tribes in California suffer horribly, driven from land, hunted, displaced. Mexican landowners, once the aristocrats of Alta California, lose property in rigged courts. And the land itself? It shudders under the weight of dynamite and pickaxes. One quirky side note, some miners spent more money on laundry than on tools. Chinese-run washhouses popped up everywhere, charging a tidy sum to clean the clothes of gold dust-covered dreamers who hadn't seen a bathtub in months. As California booms, the country faces a familiar problem: slavery. Should these new Western territories permit it? The Compromise of 1850 attempts to address the issue. California enters as a free state, but in exchange, the Fugitive Slave Act is passed, forcing even northern states to return escaped slaves to the South. It's a bitter pill, one coated in legalese and chased with outrage, and still, the map grows. Railroads begin their slow crawl westward, like iron vines reaching for the Pacific. Telegraph lines follow, turning the vast silence of the frontier into something more connected and more surveilled. In Kansas, settlers arrive with plows and politics. The Kansas-Nebraska Act lets them vote on whether to allow slavery, a process that sounds democratic until you see it unfold. Soon, Bleeding Kansas earns its name. Armed militias, fiery speeches, and street skirmishes become the new normal. A man named John Brown, eyes wild with conviction, begins making headlines. You're not sure if he's a prophet or a powder keg, possibly both. In 1854, the Republican Party is born. It gathers those opposed to slavery's expansion: Whigs, abolitionists, free soilers, and ambitious Illinois lawyers who wear stovepipe hats and ask complicated questions about justice. A young Abraham Lincoln gives speeches that rattle rafters. In one, he says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." It's a warning, not a prophecy, but the cracks in the foundation are widening. Back on the frontier, settlers in Utah Territory follow their own path. Led by Brigham Young, the Latter-day Saints, Mormons, establish Salt Lake City after fleeing persecution in the East. Their society is structured, industrious, and controversial, particularly because of plural marriage, which shocks 19th century sensibilities and fuels federal unease. Yet amid all this political heat, there is still music. In New Orleans, jazz is beginning to whisper. In Appalachia, fiddles and banjos ring out from cabins where songs blend Celtic roots with American rhythm. In California, a ranchero strums a guitar under the same stars that once guided Spanish missions. The cultural quilt is fraying, yes, but it is also vibrant. And yet, the center cannot hold. You walk through a courtroom where the Dred Scott decision is read aloud. The verdict: enslaved people have no rights under the Constitution. It lands like thunder. Abolitionists howl, the South cheers, and the middle ground. It vanishes like fog under the midday sun. In this moment you feel it. Every mile the country has stretched has also pulled it further apart. The map is nearly full. The dream is restless. And the storm is gathering. It is November of 1860. The leaves are falling fast in Springfield, Illinois, as a tall, gaunt man folds his spectacles and waits for the results. He's awkward. He laughs too loud. His beard is still a work in progress. But Abraham Lincoln is about to become the 16th President of the United States, and in doing so, crack the final pane of glass keeping the Union together. His election sends a signal louder than cannon fire. In South Carolina, it triggers a decision nearly 2 decades in the making. On December 20th, 1860, they secede from the Union, declaring they will not live under a president who opposes the expansion of slavery. One by one, 10 more states follow. By early 1861, the Confederate States of America is born, with its own president, Jefferson Davis, and a burning conviction that this time the divide isn't philosophical, it's existential. You stand on the ramparts at Fort Sumter, Charleston Harbor. It is April 12th, 1861. Confederate guns open fire. The American Civil War has begun, not in darkness or fog, but in broad daylight, with the whole world watching. What follows is 4 years of battles, speeches, despair, hope, invention, and fire. But in this section, we glance not through muskets, but through maps. Because while soldiers march and generals squint at field reports, states continue to join the Union as if the dream of expansion can't be paused for something as inconvenient as war. In 1863, the Western Territories press forward. West Virginia, born from the anti-secession sentiment of the Appalachian counties, splits from Virginia and becomes a state. It's a legal oddity, a new state carved from an existing one during a war. But Lincoln allows it, hoping to reward loyalty and tip the political balance. In the far west, Nevada gains statehood in 1864, even though it barely has enough people to fill a decent-sized parade. Why the rush? Gold. And political convenience. The Union wants more supportive votes in Congress, and Nevada delivers, all glitter and loyalty. Back in the Midwest, railroads now stitch across the heartland. Despite the war, the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 greenlights the Transcontinental Railroad. Tracks are laid, tunnels are blasted, and the vision of a nation tied together by steel and steam begins to take form, even as half of it tries to split. Meanwhile, the Homestead Act, also signed in 1862, offers land to settlers willing to brave the frontier. 160 acres free, if you can live on it, improve it, and survive 5 years. It's both a gift and a challenge. Thousands accept. Some build lives. Others meet drought, grasshoppers, or loneliness. But these policies have consequences. As settlers move into Dakota, Nebraska, and Montana territories, they disrupt native lands again. Treaties are signed, broken, rewritten, and often ignored. Tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho see their buffalo vanish and their freedom fenced off. The Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 in Colorado Territory is one of the darkest chapters of this westward push. A peaceful village of Cheyenne and Arapaho is attacked by U.S. forces despite waving white flags. It sends shockwaves through the West, and a signal that even surrender isn't protection. And yet, amid war and ruin, the country dreams forward. You step into a cabin on the open prairie. A woman kneads bread. A child traces letters on a slate. Over the hearth hangs a map, updated by hand. Each time a new state is added, it's sketched in with pencil and pride. In places like Kansas, Oregon, and Minnesota, statehood is more than a status. It's a claim to identity. In California, far from Gettysburg and Antietam, life buzzes on. The gold rush has faded into mining towns and train schedules. Chinese immigrants build the railroads. Mexican families farm the valleys. American settlers flood in, hungry for land. But tensions simmer. Anti-immigrant laws spread. Violence flares. And still, the land grows quieter beneath it all. Meanwhile, Alaska waits, frozen and overlooked, still Russian territory for now. As 1865 arrives, Lincoln delivers his second inaugural address beneath grey skies. With malice toward none, with charity for all, he says, his voice slow, steady. The war is nearly over. Appomattox looms, and in the background, the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery has passed Congress. But peace comes with a price. Lincoln is assassinated in April, shot in a theatre while watching a comedy. The country weeps, some cheer, most are simply stunned. The war ends not with a parade, but with a manhunt. Reconstruction begins. Former Confederate states are brought back, slowly, awkwardly. Tennessee is first. Arkansas, Florida, and others follow. By 1870, the last of the 11 return, on paper at least. In practice, Jim Crow laws rise where chains once hung. Voter suppression replaces whips. The South trades one system for another. Out west, statehood marches on. Colorado becomes the 38th state in 1876, just in time for the centennial. South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, and Washington follow in 1889. You ride through Helena as saloons toast statehood with whiskey and hymns. A child ties a string to a pine cone and calls it a kite. In 1890, Idaho and Wyoming join, bringing with them legends of wide skies, hardy settlers, and, in Wyoming's case, the first instance of women's suffrage in state elections. That's right, Wyoming let women vote in 1869, before it was even a state. A little-known fact, but an important one. And then comes Utah, in 1896, after a long battle over polygamy, politics, and whether the federal government could really boss around a church that was also trying to be a country. In the end, Utah agrees to abandon plural marriage, and Washington finally says, "All right, you're in." You sit beneath a pine tree in a nearly finished frontier town. The train station is painted, the schoolhouse roof still leaks, and someone's selling pickled eggs out of a wagon. This is America now. Not the colonies, not the revolution, but something else. Something sprawling, strange, hopeful, and deeply flawed. The flag now flutters with 45 stars. Just a few more to go. It is January 1912. Snowflakes settle like lace across the red desert mesas of New Mexico, and in the shadow of the Superstition Mountains, a slow breeze moves through pine and cactus alike. You're standing at the edge of America's final frontier, not in a wagon or on horseback, but on the porch of a house with electricity, a phonograph inside, and a family reading by oil lamp. After over 3 centuries of expansion, conflict, treaties, territories, and dreams both noble and dubious, the last of the 48 contiguous states is about to join the Union. On January 6, 1912, New Mexico becomes the 47th state. And just over a month later, on February 14th, a fittingly romantic date, Arizona becomes the 48th. At last, the map of the mainland US is complete. The puzzle finished, though the picture is far from peaceful. Arizona and New Mexico had long resisted statehood, not because they didn't want it, but because the rest of the country couldn't decide how to let them in. Concerns swirled over language, too much Spanish, religion, too Catholic, and politics, too not white. Yet here they are, rugged, independent, fully American, and distinctly themselves. You walk through Santa Fe, where adobe homes lean into the sunlight, and ancient pueblos rest on ridges older than any constitution. Here, native, Mexican, Spanish, and Anglo histories overlap like patterns in woven cloth. It's not a melting pot, it's a mosaic. In Tucson, you pass an open-air market where Navajo rugs, chili peppers, and cowboy boots share space. A mariachi band plays near a telegraph office. Statehood has arrived, but life here has never been waiting for permission. Meanwhile, the country is brimming with confidence and contradictions. The Industrial Revolution has transformed everything. Trains now scream across the Rockies. Telegraph lines blink like arteries of thought. Automobiles bounce along muddy roads. Skyscrapers pierce the skyline in Chicago, St. Louis, New York. And in Hawaii and Alaska, 2 vast territories linger on the edge, part of the nation in law, not yet in stars. They wait their turn. For now, they are distant voices in America's growing chorus. But back in the lower 48, the mood is something else entirely. There is pride, yes, a sense of arrival. The schoolroom maps are finally square. Children pledge allegiance to a flag with 48 stars, teachers hang portraits of Washington and Lincoln, and county fairs give blue ribbons for pies and prize hogs. Yet under the surface, a rumble continues. Native nations, whose lands once stretched from ocean to ocean, now live within reservations. Their children are sent to boarding schools where hair is cut, languages banned, stories forgotten. They are Americanized, which often means erased. In the South, segregation hardens under Jim Crow. Water fountains labeled, voters suppressed, lynchings carried out with impunity. The Civil War has ended, yes, but Reconstruction's promises were traded away for comfort and compromise. In the West, Chinese immigrants, who helped lay the very railroads that stitched the country together, face the Chinese Exclusion Act, still in effect. The same country that asked them to build it now asks them to leave quietly. And in New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty greets boat after boat of European immigrants, Irish, Italians, Jews fleeing pogroms. All arrive with calloused hands and anxious dreams. America for them is a riddle, part welcome mat, part wall. You pause outside a small schoolhouse in Kansas where a teacher leads her class in reciting states and capitals. The kids sing them like a song: Missouri, Alabama, Idaho, Oklahoma, Arizona. A boy in the back raises his hand. "Are we done now?" he asks. The teacher smiles. "For now," she says. But in truth, America is never quite done. Beyond its borders, new ambitions stir. The Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam are US territories now, acquired after the Spanish-American War. Cuba has tasted both US support and interference. The idea of empire, once fought against, is now being tested by those who once claimed to oppose it. Still, in this moment, the focus remains inward. You walk into a church in Des Moines, where a suffragette stands in front of a small crowd, holding a sign that reads, "Votes for Women." A few men scoff, others listen. By 1920, she will have her vote. But in 1912, she is still only asking. At a nearby general store, a man picks up a newspaper. The headlines speak of tensions in Europe, murmurs of alliances and assassins and old grudges with new weapons. Most Americans don't pay it much mind. Wars are something that happen elsewhere, until they don't. As night falls, you sit on a hill in Arizona, the stars vast above, the land quiet below. Somewhere out there, roads wind into deserts, canyons, mountains and plains, each one ending in a town, a home, a story. This is it. From 13 little colonies clinging to the coast to a nation that stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the bayous of Louisiana to the badlands of Dakota. 48 stars now fly above the land, but 2 more wait just beyond the horizon. And America, with all its contradictions, courage, and unfinished promises, will go find them, because that's what it does. It moves forward, even when it forgets why. And now the stars are all in place. 48 states, stitched together by rivers, roads, railways, and memory. What began as scattered coastal footholds, muddy, uncertain, reaching across oceans for survival, has become a vast expanse of ideals, ambition, and unfinished symphonies. You've walked across 300 years of wind and fire, stood among silent forests before colonists arrived, watched revolutions born in candlelit rooms, crossed plains behind wagon wheels, and traced borderlines drawn with ink and sometimes pain. You've seen the first smoke curl from Jamestown's hearth, heard the sigh of gold rush lanterns flicker in California, and felt the heartbeat of a people building something enormous without fully knowing what it was. Not a perfect union, never that, but a restless one that expands not just its borders, but its questions. Who belongs? What does freedom mean? How do you hold so many voices in one song? Even now, the map isn't truly quiet. Territories wait, debates burn, and those who came first, the First Nations, still carry stories older than any star on the flag. But here, under this vast sky, the journey finds a moment to rest. The wagons have stopped. The ships are docked. The ink is dry, at least for now. So breathe. Feel the land beneath you, not as conquest, but as memory. The pine forests of Maine, the orange canyons of Utah, the golden fields of Kansas, the wind-carved cliffs of Arizona. Let it all settle, not as noise, but as music. You're part of it now. The journey is yours too, and the story continues. Maybe not on horseback, maybe not in ink, but in the quiet courage of questions asked and the promise that they will never stop.